Hello, I'm Chris Eddy. Welcome to a special edition of VLGA Connect, coming to you this week from the Lyceum Club in Melbourne, where the VLGA has launched its first Victorian Councillor Census. A major piece of work with more than 300 councillors from the last term giving their perspectives on what it was like to be a councillor in that 2020 to 2024 period. What were the challenges? What were the barriers? What was good about the role? Would you do it again, and would you recommend it to others? We find out all of these insights with a couple of great panels on the day, led by Tanya Kovacs from Gender Lens Australia. We're going to check in with a few of today's contributors about what does this all mean and where is it going to be taken as far as the Victorian local government sector is concerned. So sit back and enjoy this special edition of VLGA Connect. John, thank you for talking to us. This census it looks to be a big piece of work. What sort of things did you have regard to in gathering this information?
Well, actually, in hindsight, the thing that was really important was confidentiality, because we asked people to tell us their own stories. And some of them we're looking at, it was quite confronting, I've got to say, some of it, the way that people spoke about the treatment they got from public and or other councillors. And so I think it was one of those jobs where we really had to think a lot about, hang on, can we report on this? Is this going to identify someone? So, but of course, the main thing you're usually looking at in a job is how do we get access to the target audience and how do we get responses out of them? And that actually turned out to work really well. We sent out emails to all 600 plus councillors and more than 300 replied, which is astonishing return rate. That
seems like a really strong response rate. Was there anything other than that surprised you perhaps about this particular task?
I think the thing that still sits with me, to be honest, is reading through those open-ended responses and just hearing the way that some councillors have been impacted by shabby treatment. Shabby's too weak a word actually, but awful treatment, either social media or people have encountered councillors and others. That really struck me, I think, and particularly the gendered nature of that, I've got to say. That was a thing that stood out to me. Look, otherwise a lot of it is pretty mechanical, right? Like you try and design a question that's independent and consistent. You send the email out, plenty of reminders to get people to participate. They can go via a portal and answer that pretty quickly, and then you sort of process the data. So most of it, while you've got to be fussy about it, it's a pretty straightforward process.
Yeah. So we tend to think the local government sector is a little bit special and different to other sectors. Is that your read, having done this piece of work? You must work with other sectors around Australia or beyond?
I reckon the thing to me, and I was a local councillor way back when, 30-something years ago. So I think the thing that's really interesting about local government is that an individual local council can often be quite myopic. They're really very, very, very focused on their boundary. And yet when called upon to think at a broader level, actually really make that transition very well. A lot of really sophisticated conversations going on about local government. The thing I would really note about councillors, though, is you have got an extremely community-connected, civic-minded group of people. It's very active in their local community. And that's quite different to state and federal politics, where elected reps are definitely that, but also there's a much more sort of ideological, partisan sort of way of thinking. And that's the really unique difference about local government. I think it's often people are very fired up about their local area. That's whereas it's a bit of ego, perhaps in local government too, but more so, I think, at that state and federal level.
I have to ask you now, you've told me you were a councillor. You've read these responses from people. Some say they would recommend the role. Others say that, they're done for various reasons. Would you go back into local politics?
I don't know if I'd personally go back, right, but it was I was 18, I was looking at 18, and then we were sort of amalgamated out of existence when I was about 25. It was a fabulous experience for me in so many ways. I shouldn't admit this, but I probably spent about 12 months not knowing what the word infrastructure meant, and I just had to sort of fill in between the cracks. And then, so as an educative process personally, and just to understand the nature of the way that democracies work and that people communicate and what's happening in your community. Like, I would attend, once you became, in those days, a Shire president, there's about 250 annual general meetings in those days, quite little municipality. And it is astonishing how much is going on. So to me, it was an incredibly educative process. The one thing that I didn't have in those days was social media. And so I think that that was probably a blessing. And I think that is something that can be a bit tricky for people to deal with. But otherwise, I found it immensely personally enriching and really, really enjoyed it. Yeah. So I look back on it with great fondness. Would I do it again? Oh.
Times have changed, haven't they? And some of those themes you've identified there about coming to grips with infrastructure and the time requirements, etc., they've come through very strongly in the research, haven't they?
Yeah, and you know what I think the thing is, like, I mean, if you think about the average person wanting to get elected to their council, right? Like, you think you're going to get the rates down and you're going to do something about planning. Guess what? You can't do either. But there's heaps of really good stuff that you can do. So I think that's a bit of a journey for people, the assumption that council has control over a range of things and that you're going to have power over these things. Well, you probably don't. But your capacity to get things done in areas that you weren't expecting is much bigger than you would have thought. So I think that's a really interesting learning journey that certainly I went on. And I think reading the results, a lot of people are finding that too. It's a really interesting clash in these results between, in some cases, people talking about finding it really hard, and yet a lot of them, oh, but I want to get re-elected again. And I think nearly 3/4 saying, yeah, I'd recommend it to someone else. So it's a really interesting clash. There really is this fascinating, it's a huge drain on your time, and yet really rewarding. And it can be personally really hard and personally really rewarding as well. And sometimes you just have a little win that really matters. I don't know how old I was, maybe 19 or something, and someone I knew that ran the, I suppose it would be like the equivalent of a food banky thing in those days in my town of Mornington. And she came to me and said, we're running out of money. And so I didn't know how to really do it, but I'd wrote a motion and asked the council for $3,000. And a councillor who I would normally have considered to have different politics to me got up, moved an amendment to fix the wording and make it $10,000. And just that thing, and I went back and spoke to the woman running the show there, and it's like, that's hundreds of families we're going to have to turn away. And I think that after about 6 months, when the excitement's running out, of getting elected and being all excited about yourself, I suppose, a win like that it's like sustains you for the next 12 months. And then you find these other useful and constructive things you can do. I can see why people get into it, and I can see why people get addicted to it. I sort of ran and then ran again and then ran again, and you sort of can't help yourself once you get involved, I think.
Great story. Where do you hope this goes next in terms of using this info that's been gathered?
Well, it's two things to me about this. One is, I suppose, internal to VLGA. If you're going to get a snapshot, if you can keep tracking it, then you can monitor your impact on things. So VLGA, my recommendation would be pick that one or two things, three at a pinch. What have we found that we want to do something about? And what are we going to do? And then next year and the year after, you get to monitor the degree to which you think you've sort of landed an effective response to that. The other thing I think stands out to me is elected representatives are and should be just accountable to the voter. But at state and federal level, there is another level of accountability. If your personal behaviour is beyond the pale, you will find that the leader of your party can very swiftly terminate your career. We've seen that happen in Victoria, a couple of examples even in the last few years. So that's missing in local government. And I think that capacity to somehow, whether it's probably got to have the big stick of dismissal at the end of it somewhere. So this probably takes some sort of legislative response, but some mechanism to hold people accountable for appalling behaviour. Look, I don't want to excessively dwell on that because, of course, most councillors are behaving really well and doing everything right.
Yes,
but there's heaps of people, especially women, but including other male councillors, talking about the one thing that makes this job hard is that one person whose behaviour is beyond the pale.
Yeah. John, thank you for talking to us. Well done on this piece of work, and hopefully, I believe this is going to be done on an annual basis. Hopefully we'll get to talk to you again.
Yeah, look forward to it. Yeah, thank you.
Jane Karslake, Councillor at Glenara, you're in your second term. You came in partway through the last term. How important was this process of being able to share your experiences as a councillor?
Well, I only did 1 year of the last term, so I feel like a bit of an imposter to say that I've done a previous term. But essentially, yes, I did have the benefit of seeing an established councillor group and work with those, and then come in as a new councillor. It was great to be able to share my observations, and it was a really good opportunity to debrief about some of my experiences. It is a terrific learning curve to be on, coming in the last year of a term of council, and there was a lot to learn. So being able to make those reflections was really valuable. Particularly, I suppose, coming in this time, I'm aware of the expectations on a councillor, and they have far exceeded what I anticipated, particularly, I think, with the introductions of the new mandatory training. And I feel like I've been a bit of a fraud, encouraging other people to run for council because it wouldn't be so much work, but in fact, it's a fair bit.
It comes through loud and clear, doesn't it, in the findings about the time commitment
Correct.
being more than what people expected it would, even though they might have been told there's a fair bit of time involved.
That's right.
And the hostility elements, how much of that resonates with you?
So, look, I've had a lot of experience working in politics, women's politics, community politics, union movement politics. So for me, disagreement is not a conflict. Disagreement, I think, is healthy, and being able to work through that. I think I'm also really fortunate to be in a councillor group that has had a lot of stability. We looked at our CEO's length of service the other day and the previous CEO, and I think we've had 2 CEOs in like 25 years. So there's been a lot of stability in our council, and I think that's also reflected in the group behaviours and conduct. It's, I think, a fairly high-performing council, and we've often told that. And I've seen that. So, but there were elements of hostility. I've heard from other councillors about their experience within councils, but also I've experienced it from the community. People not understanding your role as a public figure and wanting to take pot shots at you for something about council. And there's some pretty aberrant behaviour out there. Yeah.
So you've got some experience dealing with the political nature of it. Some councillors don't, and they can be quite taken aback, I imagine, by this. It's been talked about on one of the panels, the contest of ideas that should be able to happen but becomes very personal. What do you think can be done to help councillors navigate that element of the role?
I think work on group behaviours and developing that collegiality, which is based on respect, integrity. I mean, essentially we have a role to protect good community representation. Good governance is built on integrity in our relationships, being able to create a respectful environment. And the CEO is obviously a very important part of that. But each of us come in as individuals, and people aren't always prepared. They haven't necessarily had that experience of working in groups. And, I think this new group of councillors is still in their forming stage, not quite in the norming stage. And it's really pleasing to see very healthy, respectful debate. But there is a learning curve for a lot of people that disagreement is not an impasse. It is an opportunity. You can work your way through it. And I think the thing that's hard to understand for people is we're not an adversarial tier of politics, such as a state parliament or a federal parliament. And so people don't necessarily have exposure to the kind of board model of a council and understand how that works. Having a voice in council makes a difference. You don't necessarily always have to win the debate or get that outcome that you're hoping for to have had an influence over it. And I feel really positive about that process. And I think people need to be able to put up their hands and feel like standing is really valuable. Putting their voice into the picture is essential.
Jane, thank you for your contribution to the launch day for the census, and thanks for talking to us for VLGA Connect.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be asked.
Mike Gooey is the Executive Director of Local Government Victoria. Great to have you here today, Mike. Welcome.
Oh, well, I was very glad to be invited to the launch of such an important piece of work.
Why is it important to you? How does LGV view a piece of work like this?
Well, look, there are lots of really great opportunities that sit with work like this, Chris. I think one of the great things, obviously there's been a lot of reform that's been done recently with regard to mandatory training for councillors and for mayors. And with that, we can now actually, as this survey goes forward, we'll be able to use that as a collection point for data to see how people are feeling and whether or not some of the scaffolding that's been brought in by policy and legislation is really working.
Yeah. So there's been some good discussion in the room about whether the findings resonate with people. Are you surprised by anything you've seen come out of it?
Unfortunately, in some ways, it probably, highlights that some of the things that we're hearing are real. And so clearly some of the issues around gender are really important. I think, again, one of the great things about this piece of work is we'll start to get some insights to broader diversity issues and trends as well. And I think that that's going to be really important as we go forward. As a policy wonk, I'm really interested in those things and trying to make sense of what are the sorts of things we can do to make sure that councils really reflect well the communities that they serve.
Yeah. So there's been talk about, the contest of ideas and how that needs to happen in the appropriate way, relationships between executives and councillors, etc. Where does LGV sit in terms of its role, I guess, to help influence these things in the desired direction?
Look, that's right. So, I mean, we have the classic tools as policy and government folk, which is legislation, regulations, and everything else. But I think probably one of the key things is actually having the conversations, being really clear around what some of the expectations are. And very obviously, with the new minister, Minister Stakos, of course, a former councillor, is very keen to be talking to the sector and being very clear about what some of the expectations are. So actually being able to articulate clearly, governance and accountability expectations, transparency. We try and mirror those obviously in regulation and policy and legislation, but actually having the conversations is an important part of the game as well.
So this is going to be conducted annually. I'm imagining you support the idea of building this body of evidence over time?
Absolutely, because I think that one of the key things is, it's the old, you can't manage it if you don't measure it. So the outcomes of this survey and the ability to keep on dipping back into it, and we can see the trends over time, is going to help influence what we do as policymakers, but also more importantly, how do the organisations, how do councils themselves respond to what they're seeing? And there's also then the trick of, people, not a league table, but that whole idea of actually being able to say, how are we trending against some of these things? What are some of the things that we need to do within our organisation that will help make sense of that?
Mike, great to talk to you. Thanks for your contribution.
Thanks for the opportunity.
It was great to see so many mayors and interested councillors and people from around the sector in the room to hear the results of the survey. We thought we'd grab a few of them to get their immediate reactions. Mia, why are you here today? Why do you think this is so important?
Look, I think it really is important to understand what councillors in the sector are talking about, where we are the government or the level of government closest to community, and we are dealing with a lot of complex issues now in our communities, especially like in Wyndham, fastest growing, very large, so for us it really is important to understand what some of the challenges some of the councillors are facing, because maintaining good governance and having good decision making is really important, and we need to keep that.
Anything surprising you about the results of the census?
So nothing surprised me when we saw some of the results of the census coming out. I think because when you're in it, they can be really difficult environments. We have to make some difficult decisions in our communities, and that can be challenging around, there's some councils that support those things and there's some that aren't, and having that robust discussion is important, but in times it can heat up and it can sort of go over. But I think we do have to maintain good governance, good decision making for our communities. But nothing was surprising. I think what we're seeing in councils is that the issues that have been raised as part of these surveys are getting bigger. So some of them were around when I first got elected in 2016, but they're not going away. And the fact that we're still talking about them, and I don't think we've got good solutions for them yet, is an issue for the sector. And I think we all need to work together to try and solve that.
Kylie, lovely to have you here. What's your reaction been to the data that's come out of the census?
I think the data is supporting a lot of the things that we've already known, but we need data. We actually need this data. We need it to have the robustness, if you like, to what we then go forward with. Yeah. So congratulations to VLGA on actually doing this and on the commitment to continuing to do this, because that's also really important. I think there are lots of recommendations that are going to come out of it and go forward from it. And it's great to have had Local Government Victoria and the LGI, the Local Government Inspectorate, here today, because I think that also adds to what they're hearing and to the experiences that are being discussed.
So you contributed to the discussion this morning. There was a suggestion there about really looking earlier in the stage of a potential councillor's life cycle to help them prepare for the role. So clearly you think more needs to be done early on.
I think that it's really important that a candidate for local government actually understands what local government does and understands what the behaviours that are expected are, because often they can get into a little bit of trouble without meaning to be, if that makes sense, because those behaviours aren't as clear as they could. And I also believe that there should be a level playing field. So very much that if you're a current councillor, you have to abide by the code of conduct. If you're a candidate, it should be no different. So that's where my suggestion of going earlier is, because I think it's important that the behaviours that occur during our election time are actually behaviours that can form the relationships that actually then create healthy working councils.
Yeah. Jack, great to have you here. How are you finding the councillor census and the results today? Do they resonate with you?
Yeah, they do. Really informative, some of the information that's come out of the census, and also partially troubling. But I think what I'm really glad about is that VLGA is now capturing this data and committed to doing so every year.
What do you think needs to be done with it moving forward?
Certainly better communication into the state government in terms of what the VLGA has picked up from that, but also feedback to local councils and their own governance structures, just in terms of, I think, better preparing councillors for the role.
You're experiencing a lot of growth in your patch of the woods. Is that placing different pressures, do you think, on the role of the elected councillor than other councils might be experiencing?
Absolutely. We certainly get a lot of advocacy for our community for infrastructure to support our growing communities, and being able to, I guess, relay to them that council is responsible for some of that, but some of that is state and federal, is an ongoing challenge that we have.
And does that feed into this concept that we've heard today about the contest of ideas and being able to have respectful discussions and debates, in your view?
Absolutely. And I think a large part of that is down to the responsibility of the mayor, certainly when it's done within the chamber. It's certainly something I focus on as the mayor, is making sure everyone, regardless of how loudly they speak, has the opportunity to speak. And that can come in the form of cutting councillors off at times to allow our other more quieter councillors a chance to speak up.
Right. Great to have you here, Jack. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Look who we've found. Tony Raunic from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers. Welcome to this very special event, Tony. What's your reaction to the census?
A really interesting initiative, I think, by VLGA. I think it's something that's probably been missing in the sector, this ability to sort of encapsulate what are the current crop of councillors thinking. And I think the notion that I've heard today that there's going to be, annual type surveys, I think great to be able to then be able to tie that together and see what trajectory we're on.
You've been a councillor, albeit a few weeks ago when you were slightly,
many
slightly
years
younger.
ago. Yeah.
Does anything strike you as, fundamentally different now to then as a councillor?
Yeah. Look, everyone's going to say this, I think, but it's social media. If we didn't have that in the 90s and 2000s, certainly not to the degree now. And it is such a powerful tool, which becomes a powerful weapon if used in the wrong way. And certainly there's not that ability to switch off as a councillor that there perhaps was in my day when you left the council meeting, went home, it was late in the evening, no one's probably going to call you on the mobile, or you've probably got a good excuse not to answer. But, what we have now is the commentary on social media that you can wake up to and find that, your name's out there and someone said something very critical of you.
Having this information from the census and having this body of information build over the years to come, how do you think it should be used? What sort of a difference could it make?
Yeah. So I think what the information reflects is the views of the respondents at the time, and I think that's really important. And often we're hearing that that they're feeling exposed, they're feeling at risk. I think the next piece is perhaps, what about the perpetrators? Are we talking about what's motivating them? Are we talking about who they might be and how we can maybe upskill them in a better way to react as councillors? So I think this piece is going to be important in terms of what's the general climate out there and what people are feeling. And we want to encourage more support for councillors. And this survey, I think, will serve a lot there. I think the other part is, who are the perpetrators? Why are they misguided? Why are they feeling that they're the appropriate outlet for them is to, if you like, misbehave and breach the conduct rules?
Tony, great to see you in 3 dimensions, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Good stuff, Chris. You too. It's
been a great day at the Lyceum Club with a lot of very interested people wanting to know what this census is all about and where it's going to go from here. We hope we've given you a flavour of that today on our very special edition of VLGA Connect. As always, brought to you by the team at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers. We'll be back with our regular edition next week. Thanks so much for watching and listening to VLGA Connect.